Welcome to the Autism Advocate Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Hales. If you're looking for tips on how to advocate for and understand your autistic child in a more meaningful way, you've come to the right place, and we're so happy to have you join us. Hey there, and welcome. We're so glad to have you back today. We're going into our deeper dive, slightly longer episode of Stimming. Now, when I say deeper, I want to clarify, this is just deeper than if you didn't know. We want to let you know some information, give you some background information, and help clarify what is stimming. You probably see it. I'm sure you do it. Even if you're not autistic or don't have ADHD, you absolutely stim. Now, let me tell you about stimming. Here's a nice definition for you. Stimming, or which is short for self-stimulatory behavior, is repetitive or unusual body movement or noises. Stimming might include, everyone stims differently, but here are some that you might see. Hand and finger mannerisms, for example, finger licking and hand flapping. Unusual body movements. I don't love that term, but I see what they're saying. For example, rocking back and forth while sitting or standing. Now, you might be saying, thanks for the definition, but what does that really look like? I feel like philosophy-wise, you can say a lot of things, be kind to one another, do good things in the world, but then when it comes to practice and situations and what your life looks like, you're like, what's the right choice? So let's talk about actual situations that are applicable to you and me. So imagine, for example, this is part of my autism presentation that I give in schools and other conferences and things like that. Imagine that you find something humorous or amusing, cow joke, insert cow joke here. You find something amusing and your body has this natural reaction to do something quite strange and not logical. It laughs. So when you break down what a laugh is, it's these short bursts of air that come from your belly and chest, accompanied with a vocal sound of some kind. And people have all sorts of different laughs, right? Sometimes they snort, sometimes they're high pitch, low pitch, sometimes it's more of like a giggle, sometimes it's more of like a low guffaw. Even within the writing community, there are so many different ways to write an onomatopoeia, I think what it's called, a word that describes a sound. So there's so many ways to say ha-ha, hee-hee, guffaw, things like that, because everybody laughs so differently. Now, how does that relate to, in any reasonable way, to something being funny or amusing? How, when you break it down and look at it out of context, that doesn't make any sense. The same for crying. You find something incredibly sad, tragic, depressing. You've just hurt yourself. You're in physical pain. Your body starts to develop this lump in the back of your throat. Your nose starts to get a little bit of a tingle, and before you know it, you start getting that feeling in your eyeballs that, uh-oh, you're going to start crying. Now, I say uh-oh because a lot of us are taught that crying is not okay, that it's definitely not for boys, but absolutely not for children, which is like, come on now, right? But I have heard, I should have looked it up, that there's a statistic that talks about how stress is released. I'm trying to remember the stress chemical is released through tears. So on a basic level, that does make sense. Now, as an expression, as a physical expression of an emotion, does that make any sense that it's going to somehow help your body or that you're expressing it that way? No, this doesn't make any sense. The same with clapping. Okay, the performance is over. We now applaud and put our hands together and make this sound. What? Where did that come from? I don't know. Someone please send me an email that tells the history of clapping. And it feels like it crosses several countries and different cultures. How did that happen? I know being an instrument player myself, when we have mine was my clarinet. I know, I'm so cool. When I had my clarinet, we couldn't really, hold it like this and then put our hands together to clap. So it's very typical for musicians to take the pencil off of their stand, as they should have it. If they forgot, they're in trouble with their teacher. And they tap it on their stand as an applause, or that they stomp their feet in applause. For example, if the conductor is taking their bow, or if someone within their musical group is taking a bow, then that's how they would applaud that person. So in lieu of being able to clap their hands, they would do something else. But where did that come from? We're saying, I think what you did is good. Put the hands together. What? Does anyone else think that's just so strange? Now, here's the thing, is that it's the same thing for my autistic friends. So they just display it. Their body feels the need to express these emotions or meet these needs in different ways. So that's the only reason why we as a society look at how they stim and say, oh, well, that's strange. Because it's not how we as a neurotypical society would stim. For example, I bite my nails. I chew my cuticles, right? Well, while that's unpleasant probably to watch, no one would look at me and go, that's really weird. How crazy. They would just be like, that's kind of gross. But it's neurotypical behavior. It's not something, as the definition speaks of, it's not unusual. Now, what makes something unusual? The fact that it's not usual. So part of the big motivation that I have within the community and what I try to teach is the normalization of stimming, making the unusual usual. So when you see some of these things, such as hand flapping, unusual, what they say, body movements, that we can incorporate this into a larger understanding of, oh, that's an expression of an emotion or physical need. And that's it. No further questions or thoughts. Now, something more informational wise, there are various types of stimming. For example, there's auditory stimming. Auditory stimming uses the person's sense of hearing and sound. So, for example, you could think of vocal sounds. Perhaps they're a hummer. Maybe they're a screecher. That's always a tricky one if you are in the house with that child or adult who is screeching. Tapping on objects, tapping pencils. A lot of kids that I know, and my kids specifically, did a lot of the covering and uncovering of ears. Have you done that in a while? If you cover your ears, you should hear like a, and when you uncover your ears, it's a whole different thing. So I notice a lot of my autistic friends and autistic children who, when they are in public, especially if it's noisy, they can't control the noise environment, they will apply a sense of control by putting their hands over their ears and moving them to incorporate all the sound, eliminate a lot of the sound. So it can go like based on the rhythm that they are doing. Isn't that interesting to think about? That it's helping them assert some sense of control over their sensory environment. Totally makes sense to me. Sense. I feel like I said that 1,000 times. It can also include repetitive speech. So a lot of my autistic friends can get stuck. For example, I use the term stuck, like to say it's a word that's in rotation, almost like a mosquito bite that just needs to be scratched. It is record player going back and back and back, and you feel like the only way to kind of get it out of its loop is to say it as many times as it needs to be said. And it could be a word that feels good. It could be a word that you're just having a hard time getting out of your brain. How often has we had a song stuck in our head? Every day for me. It could also be a condition called echoalia. Echoalia refers to somebody who takes parts of speech, whether it's from a movie or a TV show or from another individual who's speaking, and repeats them. They might repeat whole long phrases, short phrases, entire movies and speeches, or just short 1 to 2 word phrases. They're not always used in the appropriate context. Sometimes they are, which is really interesting once you understand your child is communicating, but they're using other people's words and phrases and borrowing them as their own. It's really, really interesting. Okay, tactile stimming. So tactile stimming uses the person's sense of touch. It may include behaviors such as skin rubbing or scratching with the hands or objects. So for example, I am somebody who rubs my feet together when I'm sleeping or bedtime, and it's this self-soothing stimming thing. I don't know what it is, but something tactile wise is very sensory pleasing for me. It could also be an anxiety trigger, meaning maybe you have a certain area that you scratch on your hand, on your neck. I have a few autistic friends who engage in more self-injurious tactile stimming, where they may hit certain areas or, like I said, scratch certain areas, but to the point where they're causing, unfortunately, damage to their skin. It could be you're rubbing not just your own body together, but a certain plushie. If you're watching, you can see some of the plushies behind me, but it could be that you are touching on your nose, touching on your cheek, touching a certain pillowcase that you have to have with you all the time. It could be a certain texture that you really, really enjoy, or the opposite, that you really hate and try to avoid. Other senses of tactile stimming can include hand movements, such as opening and closing fists, or squeezing hands really tight, or finger tapping. Visual stimming. This includes someone using their sense of sight and repetitive behaviors. It includes such as staring or gazing at objects such as ceiling fans or lights. Those are a lot of especially earlier signs in very young children. That's what a lot of parents report seeing. Repetitive blinking or turning lights on and off. That's very visually stimulating. Moving fingers in front of the eyes. This is another one that a lot of parents of younger children report as seeing one of their first signs that their child may be autistic. Hand flapping. This is one that many autistic people find some joy in. With these stims, we do have to remember that each autistic individual is totally different from another. They have a lot of the same methods and drives, and but the way each part is executed, their needs are completely different from one another. So not all autistic children and adults flap their hands. Not all autistic children and adults do pacing or rocking back and forth. So always keep that in mind when you either ask questions or make comments to other people, that you're aware of each autistic person has a very individual, separate path. Continuing on with the visual stimming, it can include eye tracking or peering from the corners of the eyes. When you think of the feeling, and I'm doing it if you can see me, from looking very hard or aggressively, turning your eyes in a very dramatic, strong way, you can feel almost a pull on the back sides of your eyeball. Can you kind of think about what I'm doing? Hopefully, if you're driving, you're not trying to do that yourself. Please focus on the road. There's this stimulation that you feel behind your eyeballs. And I have a lot of young autistic friends who absolutely do this. Sometimes they'll put their face downward and then look up in a very aggressive way. And by aggressive, I just mean with a lot of strength and energy. And you can feel the way that it makes your eyeballs feel. And it also changes visually what you're seeing as well. This is one that, again, a lot of people know, see, and have associate with autism. Object placement, such as lining up objects. So many of my autistic friends thrive in identifying patterns. So rather than seeing a whole thing of Legos and saying, oh, let's, get our imaginations flowing, I'm going to build a tower. A lot of them will say, oh, I see big squares, smaller rectangles, and then really small squares. I'm going to group them as such, from big to small. And that sits really well with them. That's how their brain is enjoying itself, to make sense and to make patterns of things. So it's not a wrong way of playing. It's just a different way of playing, but it's absolutely a form of stimming. Vestibular stimming is one that we see a lot, but we don't really recognize what it's about. So vestibular stimming uses a person's sense of movement and balance. It may include behaviors such as rocking front and back or side to side. So again, that sense of movement and balance. Also, a lot of these become combined. So if you allow your eyes to glaze over, and then you're also rocking side to side, you're also getting that visual stim and that vestibular stim. Another one that my youngest loves, spinning. Now, I am an ancient person who can't handle spinning for even to be on a swing that goes back and forth. That is not even spinning, but it makes me feel nauseous because I am a sad old person. And a lot of my autistic friends, that brings them a lot of satisfaction. It just feels good. It feels right. And beyond that, sometimes it feels needed to help regulate themselves, that it's something that almost like a big deep breath may be for neurotypical people. And just taking that moment, that self-regulation moment, is often the same with my friends who are spinning. The same with jumping, that would be my oldest son, and pacing. Perhaps it's a ritual of sorts where they're walking in a specific area back and forth. Maybe they touch certain things. But again, that is something that a lot of people recognize. And the last two, olfactory or taste stimming. Taste stimming uses a person's sense of smell and taste. And if you haven't realized, smell and taste are so very closely related and intertwined. When, for example, you have a very stuffy nose or have a cold, you can't taste things anywhere near as well. We can all remember when we'd have to take medicine from mom and we plug our nose because we don't want to taste it. And then when we plug our nose and taste it, it's not as strong. So those are very intertwined, especially in the stimming case. So when we apply this to a stimming sense, it's sniffing or smelling people and objects. My youngest likes to smell anything he's about to eat, which I understand for an enjoyment sense that most people do. But again, we are talking about repetitive behaviors. So not necessarily a sense of, oh, I'm just taking this moment to savor and allow all my senses to dig in sensory-wise into this moment. We are talking about more of a compulsive need to sniff or smell things, objects, people. Licking. That sounds like a fun one, doesn't it? Hopefully that person develops a great immune system as they lick all sorts of objects and things. And I can sympathize as a parent how that must be tricky and how you may get stares from people who don't know that everybody in this situation is absolutely doing their best and they are stimming. A lot of people, for example, chew gum. A lot of people smoke cigarettes. And for them, that's an absolute stim. But because it's a socially acceptable, society-wise, it's something that is acceptable, normal, in quotes, normal to do, they don't see it as a stim. It's absolutely a stim. Tasting objects and placing them in the mouth. So we associate this kind of a behavior in a neurotypical child much more in the very young baby-like stages where they are exploring everything with their mouth, right? That's not the kind of experience that we are talking about these autistic children having. We're talking about that they feel compelled to do this, that this gives them some sense of satisfaction or enjoyment or fulfills some sort of need or purpose for themselves. So those are the different kinds of stimming. Isn't that really interesting to think about? We only think of a handful of things, and yet as someone who I believe I'm neurotypical, I'm not sure. There are a lot of times I think, wow, I feel like I can understand the autistic community well enough that most autistic people say, you've got to be on the spectrum, which I absolutely consider a compliment. But at the same time, I have so many people say, no way. So who knows? I would be totally open to it. It would sure explain a lot of things. But my whole goal and purpose is, as I said, to normalize stimming, meaning what I had said before, that these unusual body movements or unusual mannerisms are now considered not unusual, that these are just what various people with various stereotypes need to do to have their body and their feelings feel safe. And that we can all support that kind of action as long as it's being done in a way that, 3 things, doesn't harm self, others, or property. Those are the 3. Doesn't harm self, others, or property. If it is, as some people would call, distracting, there are a couple things I would apply to that. Number 1, who cares? And that may seem quite harsh. Number 2, sure, if it's something that can be replaced, then I think that would be fine. But you have to remember that the stim is addressing a need. You cannot just tell a child or an adult, do not stim. Their body is expressing a need to behave the way it is behaving. So it's like telling somebody who is outrageously sad to not cry. That's not acceptable. What you may say to that person is, I see that you're having a really hard time and that you're very emotional at the moment. Would you prefer some privacy? Maybe they say no. But offering them some privacy, or could I get you some water, right? Rather than don't cry. No, you offer support. You offer different options. You offer, again, if you saw somebody who was engaging in other self-stimming behavior that needed some help, then you would offer support, right? Not criticism or not judgment. I believe as we come to understand stimming, its purposes, where it comes from, that it is based in, again, a neurological drive to do something, much like, in a more minor sense, but in a sense that neurotypical people can relate to, much like yawning. I don't know what that is. Are we tired? Are we waking up? I don't know. It's just a yawn. Yawning, crying, laughing, clapping, cheering. What is that? Woo! What is... I better say woo real loud. I don't know. Lots of things that when you really pull them apart don't make much more sense than my autistic friends who are also doing their stimming. And if you can, in a compassionate way, consider how you can support them more wholly, how you can support them from a place of understanding. So rather than just an awareness piece, an acceptance piece, rather than just, well, they're just doing their thing that's separate from me and I don't really get it, but that's okay. Instead, it's it may be that they're stimming. It may be that they are doing and engaging in this behavior to help their emotions and feelings and body feel safe. And I am for that. I would like for that person to do that. Again, that was a very mild deep dive, in quotes, to stimming. I hope that has been helpful for you. Please let me know if you have any questions. And if you want one of your questions or topics dived into on our podcast, you can email us at theautismadvocate@gmail.com. I sure hope that these conversations are helpful. If you find the content helpful, please like, subscribe, share, whatever it is that platform encourages you to do. I get messages from parents that tell me, I'm so glad I found your stuff. I feel not alone. I feel like I'm not crazy. And I feel like I can better, that's not a real thing. I can better help support my child in a meaningful way from a place of understanding rather than a place of, I don't know how to help. I just know that we're not doing this right? So please help me find those people. I'm so grateful for you, and don't forget that I'm rooting for you. Bye-bye. Want to submit a question? Email us at theautismadvocatepodcast@gmail.com. Follow our social media outlets and check out our shop featuring my Autism Acceptance, Children's Illustrated books, and other fun autism acceptance items. Don't forget, I'm rooting for you, and we'll see you next time.